Today we have Mirko Zardini with us. Mirko is the director and chief curator of the Canadian Centre for Architecture. For those of you who don't know it, this is one of the leading institutions in the world doing architecture projects and exhibitions. And Mirko is an architect. He's the director and the chief curator of the CCA since 2005. His research engages the transformation of contemporary architecture by questioning and relooking at the assumptions on which architects operate today. One of his latest exhibitions is called Imperfect Health, the Medicalization of Architecture, and in which he was exposing the excessive optimism in the therapeutic role of architecture. Mirko has been the editor for Casabella and Lotus International Magazine, and has a lot of publishing articles on the realm of architecture. And he has also taught design and theory at architecture schools in Europe and in the United States, including Harvard University Graduate School of Architecture and Design, Princeton University, the Swiss Federal Polytechnic University in Zurich, and the Federal Polytechnic at Lausanne. And I'm personally a big fan of Mirko's work for many years, and we had never met, so I'm very happy to have him here tonight. And he's been going to talk tonight about actions and how you can make actions to change your city. So please welcome Mirko.
So thank you very much, and thank you for the kind invitation, and my apologies. As you have heard, I've been teaching in Zurich for some years, but I was never able to learn German in Zurich, so my apologies. I'm going to present everything in English. It is such a poor English that I think it will be not very difficult to follow me. The first, what you see here is an image of a nocturnal walk. The city is Los Angeles, and that is the city in which you can pick up fruit during the night. This is Sao Paulo. This is the city in which on Sunday an entire piece of the highway which is crossing the city is closed to traffic and is used by pedestrians. This is Sharia in the United Emirates, Arab Emirates, and is the transformation of a square into a soccer playground. I stop any reference to soccer now, because, sorry for that. And this is the city of Turin, in which they hired a shepherd and sheep in order for the maintenance of the urban parks. So generally, when we think of a city, we generally, well, because of our background as architects, urban designer and so on, landscape architects and so on, we are inclined to think of buildings, streets, squares, gardens, parks. We think generally of towers, skyscrapers, not so much in Berlin, but anyway in North America. We generally think of the rivers, of the spectacular panorama, of the hills, big or small. A city is much more than the stones, the material, the asphalt, the bricks of the buildings. Is much more than the asphalt of the street. Is much more also of the, how can I say, the wood and the corrugated sheets of the shanty towns that more and more are growing around the larger urban settlement in the world. Cities are built by the people who live there and by the people who pass by. And the physical configuration of the city is the result of an incredible number of actions that sometimes they converge towards a common objective or goals, and very often they collide each other. There is a friction, a different objectives among these different actions. The combination of all these forces produce some effects that are translated in the permanent physical environment. So what I would like to speak tonight, to present to you, is an unusual collection of actions that generally we do not consider too much important for the definition of the urban landscape in comparison with the traditional action that are dictated by the urban project of redevelopment and so on. I have not to speak of this in Berlin, of course, you know that very well. In the last 20 years, the official culture of architecture and urban design has spent a lot of time and thinking in finding a new way to describe the transformation of the contemporary urban environment. And generally, you know, any bookshop you go, you can find books of photography, trying to give a new interpretation of the urban environment, atlas. What is very interesting of all these kind of publications is the fact that more and more the effort to describe the contemporary city is not anymore quantitative, so it's not anymore dealing with the new dimension of the city, but trying to describe the quality of the contemporary city. Parallel to that, in the last 20 years, we have seen a kind of resurgence of a kind of an underground river, which started in the 60s and the 70s with a lot of participatory process, actions, and intervention in the city, which disappeared for a long period from our view, and now more and more they start to reappear. So this is what I would like and what we try to do with this work, to collect these kind of actions and trying to see what is possible to do, what is behind that, and what is the potential of these kind of actions. It is also a critique of the traditional way of considering the city by the contemporary planning strategy, which are very often still related to the modern idea of planning and zoning. We have to recognize that the modern idea of the city based on the idea of living, of let's say of dwelling, of work and leisure, all connected by circulation, was deeply related to the idea, and at the center of that, the idea of work and an idea, an objective of efficiency of the mechanism, which was very, very important in defining then the urban strategies and the planning strategies. But if we look at the contemporary situation in comparison to that, what can we say about that? Most probably, if you look at the contemporary city, you see at the center of that not the idea of work anymore, so not anymore the idea of production, but the idea of consumption. And this idea of spare time that we have and the increasing time that we are allowed to use for ourselves is leading us directly to an increased greed for this kind of consumption. We become greedier in our appetites for this kind of consumptions. It's not my words. I am now trying to translate into English some of the notes that Hannah Arendt did about the idea of work and consumption. And we can also say, perhaps there is a wonderful book by Ballard on the idea of the contemporary life related to the consumption and Kingdom Come based on the idea of a shopping center, we can also say that consumption is a kind of a social redemption, is kind of a glue that is able to maintain unified our society. So in respect to this situation, I feel that this kind of actions, they are showing a new capacity of the individuals or of some groups, some professionals sometimes, some institutions sometimes, to do or to make something and not only to have a passive role, and to define new opportunities in the definition of the urban realm. That was the reason for us to collect these kind of actions. It was a first search and inquiry. We were collecting all over the world a series of actions that had a certain influence in the urban environment. We did a book, a poster, a website in which we collected this action and other action had been posted, an exhibition in which we collected these kind of images, materials, text, objects. And at the end, we selected 99 actions. And a first way to look at them is to look at them following 4 categories that we choose. The first is about walking from 2 different aspects. One is from the idea of a kind of a new idea of the body. More and more we are dealing with a multisensorial body, and the walking is in a certain way the way to enhance this kind of idea. And the other is because of the social components of the idea of walking. I just show you 2 actions. This one is in California, and as you know, California, and especially Malibu, is very famous for the beaches, which are public, but the access to the beaches is generally controlled by private owners, and there is a system of deceiving the access to the public beaches. So what has been produced in that case by the urban rangers was a kind of a guide in order to allow the visitors to access the beaches in Malibu. Another example, and there are different of this kind, is a project in New York City and then expanded to Boston and other places, Amsterdam and Ljubljana too, which is referring to a condition in which we live more and more, which is the control of the public space through cameras and videos. In this case, the project was to develop a software which is allowing each of us to introduce the kind of destination and to choose the walk or the route which is offering less control. It's almost impossible to think that there is no control, but at least less control through cameras. There are other projects similar to this, dealing with the idea of control, which, on the contrary, they play the opposite strategy. They suggest the idea of theatrical performance in front of the video surveillance camera. And that is a way to reappropriate of this kind of freedom that has been stolen to us. Another aspect we insisted a lot is the one of gardening. in the contemporary city, more and more we see a lot of landscape intervention. Landscape is very interesting, is raising this kind of tendency, is raising very interesting issues, because very often these projects are introducing a new process of aestheticization of the urban landscape. And the idea of landscape very often is in a certain way used in order to create a kind of fluid narrative, a fluid shared space, hiding behind that a lot of the conflicts that are part of the urban life. So our idea about the nature and the gardening was more in relationship to the gardening as a different way to produce or to use the urban resources in the natural resources in the city. This is a extreme example of foraging, which means collecting and using edible plants in the urban environment. This person is Fergus Drennan, and since 1990s he has been looking for and eating this kind of wild edible or medicinal plants in the city. He's living in London, and his last project was attempting a year-long diet only on this kind of strategy. The third example was we were interested to deal with was recycling. You know that our society is based on the idea of waste, and pollution is a kind of basic description of what is our way of operating. And some of these projects, they are dealing with the built environment. For example, Coloco, operating in France and also in South America. They developed a project of mapping the abandoned buildings or the unfinished building, the skeleton, in order to, the skeleton structures, in order to reappropriate this building through new housing strategy. Some of these were put in place in Paris, and some of that they were put in place in South America. Another example of reuse is this project by Recetas Urbanas. It was the idea of reusing an apartment and adding some balcony to this apartment. It is in Sevilla, in Spain. The problem that they faced was that there was no permission to add this kind of balcony to the apartment. So they studied the regulation of the city of Sevilla, in which it's possible to use scaffolding in order to remove graffiti from the walls of the building. So they covered the building with graffiti, then they asked a permission for a scaffolding, and then they kept the scaffolding and they created an internal balcony, a kind of a loggia through this scaffolding that they have created. They are a kind of, say, in between architects and lawyers, because they always study very carefully the urban regulation. For example, again in Sevilla, it's possible to place a dumpster in the public space if you have to remove the debris of the renovation of a building, of an apartment. So they used that, and then they covered the dumpster with these playgrounds, which made it possible to transform temporarily some part of the city in this kind of children playgrounds. A more structural and community-oriented strategy action is the one in South Bronx in New York. Omar Freila is a worker-owned cooperative which is reusing, collecting all the scrap dumped in South Bronx for the renovation of buildings or the demolition of buildings all over New York City. Instead of bringing this to a waste space outside or a dumpster outside, there is this place in which they reorganize this material in order to be reused for construction purpose. One category we were very interested in was the idea of playing. In a certain way, the idea of playing is suggesting that all the urban environment is a kind of huge playgrounds. This is Sao Paulo in Brazil. This is a building by Oscar Niemeyer. Inside you have a museum and an exhibition space. And in spite of all the signs that you can find, is used by the young people to, how do you say, as a playground, you see them falling down from the top of the building. Renzo Piano did, I don't know if you noticed that, he changed the first part of the covering of the New York Times building in New York. The lowest part, he covered that with ceramic panels. And unfortunately for Renzo Piano and the police, these kind of ceramic panels were used by people like Alain Robert and other as a climbing wall. It is not a new tradition. Already in English college in the 20s and 30s, there was the tradition of climbing the buildings. And Alain Robert is a French climber. So let me now try to, before to go to discussion, to look at some of this action in a different way. So trying to show the possible attitudes which are emerging from this kind of activities. One is a kind of taking advantage of the excess, kind of ingenious reaction to the urban conditions. This is the fragrance in New York. You know that most of the food is trashed away for aesthetical reason or because of the date of expiring is not making this food anymore possible to be sold, and this is creating this kind of possibility for the fragrance in New York to collect this food. There is a more organized system than that, which has been organized by the Forays, a small group operating in Toronto, Montreal, and New York. Sorry, still the other one. This is a sticker that they apply on the different kind of container in which there is the possibility to find available food from the supermarket on the shop dismissal. Another example is this project of pre-care in Belgium, in London, Milan, Barcelona. More and more you have office space that are not utilized, unused, and their project is to sign a contract with the landlords for temporary occupation. The contract implies that you don't pay any rent, but you pay the expenses to cover the utility cost of these, and could be that you rent this space for non-profit, it's generally for non-profit organization for a few months or some years of time. A very important aspect of this group, of these, some of these actions was the, how can I say, the idea to offer clues to other people in order to operate. Basurama, which is a kind of safari of waste object, has created a kind of website in which you can anticipate the day in which regularly the city officials, they recover the large objects and furniture, and you can collect that, those in advance than the official collecting. A similar project is another website starting in Tucson in Arizona, which is starting from an email in order to make available the objects, indicating the location and the quantity to other people. And another kind of mapping and planning is this one by Steve Alba. Steve Alba is one of the most important vertical skateboarder since 1970s, and he is also a pilot. So in a certain way, what he's doing is flying over Los Angeles, spotting the abandoned swimming pool in order creating a catalog of these, making this available in order to offer everybody the possibility to use this kind of vertical space skateboarding. A lot of these actions, they suggest the possibility to take an alternative in the urban, how can I say, in the destination of the urban spaces. One, and this is really a very interesting point, some of these actions very near to political engaged activities. This one was a project in Los Angeles, the transformation of an abandoned industrial field into a cornfield. Was managed by Farm Lab. But this one is even more interesting, is by Recetas Urbanas, again in Sevilla, and is a project which implies the use of these lamps, which have to be charged. What is the purpose of this? They create a group of people which is going around in the community asking for energy to charge the battery of these lamps. And during the night, they move around the urban spaces for which there is a questionable decision by the municipality in terms of use of this urban space. So it's a way to mobilize the local community in respect to some political decision which are referring to the use of some urban spaces. A lot of these, action again, are dealing with conflicts and contrast in the city. This is the collection of images, a catalog of the different devices in order to make it possible to sit in the city of New York. You know, more and more the urban spaces are, how can I say, unfriendly. And this is a project of Sarah Ross in Los Angeles, considering, especially in Los Angeles, a lot of these efforts to make it possible to use benches for different purposes. She created this kind of special adaptable clothing in order to overcome the brilliant ideas of the local municipalities. This in Philadelphia is one of the few interesting urban park in which there was an integrated public park integrated with the idea of skate, in which skateboarding and other skateboarding users and other users, they were able to manage a common use of the spaces, not creating conflicts. And this is a project of a young student from Columbus who transformed and manipulated the shoes in order to make possible for you to do an urban parkour, how do you say, rolling over the handrail of the stairs, clearly entering the idea of parkour. Parkour is a way to use the urban environment with all these difficulties, urban things, as a huge playground and going through all the different obstacles. It is, again, there is a very important French tradition for that, like David Bell, but it's more and more an international practice. For the people less trained, the Rotor group in Brussels produced this kind of stairs to overcome the obstacles. And at the end, let's go a little bit to the more questionable project, the one that were cataloged under the kind of guerrilla actions. A lot of these actions, clearly, they are illegal according to the urban regulations. And most of the ones in this section are for sure not accepted by the urban regulation. The first one I would like to start with is a German one by Gerhard Lang. Is a development of an idea of Lucius Burckhardt, starting already a lot of years ago, and this example is referring to 1993, is a kind of a portable carpet, a zebra carpet that you can, is 4 by 30 meters, that you can use in order to cross the street wherever you want. This is the official guerrilla gardening action, mainly in London. Is Richard Reynolds is the, can I say, the leader of this kind of actions. Is the idea to use abandoned green space in the middle of the traffic or abandoned along the street in order to cultivate vegetables or to plant flowers and trees. Very often the public administration is stripping this out. This is even a little bit more radical, is N55 group in Copenhagen, is a rocket with 2 kilometers range with seeds inside, seed bomb, which can reach the 5 kilometers height so that these seeds could be spread all over a large areas of the city. And this is a way to reclaiming the parking space of the car. This is a fake coverage of a car, which is used as a tent. It started in Vienna, but then developed coming south through Trento and to the Italian side. It's very successful. The only negative side is that the tent with the shape of the Porsche has been stolen. This one is the Urban Repair Squad in Toronto. One of the problems that you face very often in a lot of these kind of requests is that general public administration, they are not against them. Only takes years before they take a decision. So in Toronto, the Urban Repair Squad decided to create illegal bicycle paths. So they dress like municipal workers, and during the night they go around to trace this kind of path for bicycles in Toronto. This is there are, in the project that you have seen, sometimes there are architects operating inside these, not very often. This is another case of architects involved in this, the MAF group in England. It is in Tilbury, and it was a project for a park. It was a very complex project. There were different ideas of the use of the park. It was a space which was used for a long period by the population, but also was a space in which animals, especially horses, were allowed to stay. So their idea was to create, to involve the local population, especially children, in this kind of theatrical performance in order to convince the population and the community to maintain in this park also a space for the horses. And this is mainly an educational program in Detroit for the exemplary shrinking city. Is an example of how a manual how to use this abandoned space for urban agriculture. Another one of a plan smarter strategy is this one in Colombo, Sri Lanka, which was the effort through the engineering of infrastructure, especially water, to create the possibility of urban agriculture in a shanty town in the slums around nearby Colombo, about 500 people living there. The Hermann Knochflacker is a Vienna engineer. And since 1975, he is fighting against the presence of the car and the symbolic values of the car in the city, in respect to the lack of respect of the symbolic and presence of the pedestrians. So in order to mobilize a protest, he is starting to move around, as a pedestrian, to move around the cities, especially Vienna, but then internationally, with this kind of apparatus, which is showing the kind of space that a car is occupying in the urban space. This is one of my favorite because it's a very, how can I say, a small effort. It's mainly bring your bench. So how to transform a public space, benches already present in the garden of the people or distributed to the different families. And these families have been asked to bring their own bench in a public space in order to transform this in a shared space. And I just want to end with the idea of shared space, not only among different people, but among different functions. Again, Topotec in Germany, in Copenhagen, is a parking space with a huge umbrella, and is an alternative use as a parking space or as a market. And the big umbrella opening is the symbol when the market is on. And this is again the summary of the action which I started with at the beginning, which are underlying this importance of a more shared and collective use of the public space. Now, we can, few minutes, I know that you don't like too long presentation and you like to engage in debate and discussion, but I would like to bring to you a small reflection at the end of this long list of projects. Clearly, for us, it's very, very important to encourage this kind of new attitude in the definition of the urban space. It's very important to understand that in this kind do-it-yourself urbanism, it's very important the definition of the actors, who is doing that. Mainly the answer is you. You can be individual, community, groups, some institutions. The city is a place of conflicts, it's not a place of pacifications. The real point that I want to raise is that perhaps tactical action are okay, but perhaps we have to start to think of more strategic decision, which implies a different kind of thinking and commitment, which is not anymore related to specific solution of some problems, but a larger vision of how we want to live. And I think that is a nice issue to be raised today in a moment in which the values of our society are not only our societies, perhaps not Germany, but say our societies generally are in a deep crisis, and the values on which our common life and our personal life is based are under criticism and rethinking. And what I prepare for you is a white booklet in which you could describe and make a list of your action if you wanted to engage in this kind of action. I don't say, I don't have any other word to describe that. So I don't pretend you to deal and to do anything with that, just like a memo for you, for your personal commitment and perhaps for thinking of different ways to engage with the urban environment. Abandoning for the ones of us who are architects, abandoning for a while the assumption of our discipline and starting to look at the problems from a different perspective.
So I know that a lot of businesses, when they find out that people are digging through their trash, will lock it, and that's like a huge problem. So when they're putting the stickers on, do they start to lock the dumpsters?
I don't know. Perhaps in Montreal, Toronto, they are less organized than in Berlin, so that there is a hope that they are still have access to that. Well, I say for sure they are less organized from my experience.
I actually have a question because I was having a conversation with an architect earlier today about the idea of participation and how everything seems to be turning into participatory actions and urban interventions. And she was extremely concerned as an architect. I've met many architects that embrace this sort of actions, and she was very concerned as to where that leaves the position of the architect. What do you have to say about that as an architect? You're
about
an architect
participation, participation is not new. In the 60s and the 70s, it was a process which had a lot of different ways to define itself. In the United States, was a process of advocacy planning, in a certain way in which the architects were representing the unsaid wish or interest of a community, but was always the architect to patronize these kind of things. In Europe, you had some example of participation, but mainly, again, was the architect to attract the user, generally, not even the owners, in the process in order to build the process. So in both cases, I saw this example of the 60s and 70s as a way for the architect to enrich the design process, and sometimes also in a very questionable way, avoiding conflict and discussion, but incorporating these, guiding these inside the process. And today, honestly, I am very critical of the architecture profession. I see a lot of efforts in the younger generation to define the architecture practice in a different way. I think it's necessary to do that. I am very worried, to think that, imagine that for the next 20 years, my mandate at the center or for a magazine or for a blog will be to speak of another museum, another cultural center, another building for a corporate firm. I feel that will be very disappointing. Our society is really in crisis, it is changing, new values are emerging, and I think that architecture has to find a total different role in respect to that. Now, the real problem that I see is that very often this kind of role is considered as if architecture has the solution of the problems, as if architects are able to offer proper solutions. And I doubt that the contemporary architecture culture can do that, because inside the contemporary architecture culture, I see a kind of the same attitude. You pretend to have the solution. That most of the time you are thinking as you have been thinking for the last 50 years as architect. So what I feel is important is really to criticize the assumptions on which architecture is operating today. Sustainability, I give you an example. Do you think that real sustainability is to respect the LEED standard? I'm speaking for the American system or the European system. I don't know which is the German one or the European one. Sustainability is a much more complex thing than that. A sustainable building has no meaning as long as is not part of a larger thinking at an urban level or at a social political level. So as long as architects think that to have a nice insulation and 5 solar panels on the roof is the solution of sustainability, I don't think that they are contributing to the solution of any problem. I'm thinking that they are aggravating, are increasing the problem that we are dealing with. So in this respect, I think that architecture culture has totally to change, and also the architecture practice has to change totally. And the best for architects is, in my opinion, to start to listen and to have a conversation before then pretend to have a solution which are based on outdated models. It's a big moment of transformation, I feel. And we have to be able to change all our assumptions in order to deal with this moment of transformation.
I'd like to ask about whether you see here, whether you see any trend or movement towards these actions becoming instruments of sort of formal city planning or city design.
Well, the most interesting, because I think is a mediation, is self-commission on the side of architects, working together with some communities. And this is a very nice example of a mix and a possible transition, which is able to deal with a population of users on one side and the institutionalized side on the other. And this, I think that in this sense, the role of these architects is very, very important. Seems to me in this moment the easiest way to infiltrate the traditional planning process in a way which is acceptable on both sides. And there are examples, especially in Europe, of this self-committed work by architects in respect to that.
You have mentioned that conflict is good in the city because it's not good that city is too passive. But could you be more specific? What kind of conflicts?
All of these actions, all these things, are simply the physical revelation of conflict in the use of the city, which the official way of dealing with the urban space didn't recognize before. In this sense, for me, they are positive because are making very clear the necessity or the wish of certain users in respect to a certain kind of situations. And in this sense, I feel that all these actions are positive because they reveal something that before was there but was not possible to see and had no physical translation. But our society is based on conflicts, honestly. So, you know, and I think that conflict can be very constructive if sometimes they are not, but sometimes they can be very constructive. I can't judge, generally speaking, but all the city is based on conflict of interest of different groups and different kind, and is a negotiation every time. And what will be the negotiation? That is something that has to be discussed. But it's always a negotiation among different interests. Also at a much bigger level that we didn't discuss tonight of the right to the city, the economic and these kind of things.
No, but it was a very similar question. So just maybe more general about your opinion or what do you think? What is the transformative potential of all these actions you just introduced? Because I'm not sure. It is definitely a way to engage in the city and to participate in the city, but will this stay on a merely, let's say, hobby level? It is just fun to do it. Is there really potential for the city to change something? And there's also a very high, I don't want to call it risk, but a very high potential of having these forms and actions being incorporated, like for other users. And so I think this is always a critical question. What is there like a third way by an artistic movement which is not sanctioned in the city to change something, or will it stay on a cultural level? And the second thing after the question right now, or the second question maybe is, do you think that they always have to follow something material or physical after these uses? Because sometimes, maybe especially in a Berlin perception, it is more like we find a way for an alternative use of a place or a city, and we don't really want it to be implemented by the institution or official architecture, but rather stay at a space for improvisation.
No, they have not to be physical. The fact that they are physical is because I pretend my competence to be limited to a physical environment. But what was the effort of this exercise was to show a range of options and tools which are available. And again, when my conclusion also was a little bit critical of the fact that we can limit the use to the specific tools to the solution of some tactical issues. But what will be a more strategic use of these tools? This is something that, again, is not, could be, in this sense, be part of an urban strategy. But in this case, the general strategy will be defined at an urban level by an institution or by a group of planning, whatever. That is a way to incorporate these kind of things in a kind of alternative institutional strategy. I don't know if that is possible or not. Or could be incorporated in an alternative community strategy, but is the community, I would like to avoid the users, whatever, try to avoid to give this the traditional meaning, to develop a more sophisticated strategy to reach a certain objective. When I say that there is a political issue there, is because at the very end is what do you want to obtain? Is not only to have a better or a line for the bicycle. You want something else, perhaps more than that. So that is a question that is not up to me in this moment. I'm not able to answer that. I'm only saying that that is what is necessary to discuss in any specific situation. And imagine that in Berlin there are a lot of entity, groups, whatever, that could develop a strategy using certain kind of tools like this one or similar to this one in order to obtain certain results. Which are these results? Which are these objectives? You know, it's not anymore my field.
99 projects, that's ultimately a kind of arbitrary number. I was curious, A, to know if that had been reduced from quite a large number, which you edited down to 99. Was that for kind of curatorial reasons, or did you have, were there many more you wished you had been able to include in the project? The other question I had was, using 99 and perhaps having in your head even more, were you able to, or did you intend to draw any conclusions about either the kind of cities that tended to generate actions like these, and or the kinds of cities wherein they would be successful, however you defined what successful is?
99 because we need a certain amount of actions to demonstrate that there was all over the world a critical mass. 99 because is a number that you feel, you know, why not 100? So it means that is just an open number. And in fact, on the website, there were posting of other projects more and more. And I do not, from my side, I do not think at these actions or this project as really projects. I look at them as, because this is something that somebody else has to do and to use them. I look at all of them together as a critique of the architectural practice, of the institutional practice, and of the society in which we operate and which we recognize ourselves today. So on my side as an institution, there was no intention to develop a project, but mainly to show a potential and to develop a critique of the reality in which we are operating today. So that was the intention.
I was thinking about several other projects that have been not put up by artists but by companies, like the big karaoke in the main station in Brussels, for example, which was in a way a different way to use the big hall. So you have 100 people singing there, or opera singers, for example. But on the other hand, it was a big campaign for T-Online. And I have several other examples where I can see that what we see here in these actions, and which is also produced in street art, is being used as tools for advertising. So I'd like to know that, is it a bad sign?
It's inevitable, I think, of that, you know, that most of our, even if we want to be critical and alternative, a lot of these kind of things are incorporated in the opposite, not in the opposite practice, in a practice which is shaped in a different way than the one that we intended. The reason that we refer to community-based artists or self-committed by architects for most of these is to show the original critical intention of this kind of project. It is inevitable that some of them are incorporated in practice which are the opposite than that. Does not mean that we have to stop to think in a certain way, because that is a continuous process of critique and alternative, looking for alternative, as long as we know what we are looking for. What I personally looking for is I would like to change the assumption on which contemporary architecture is operating. That is my objective. I would like continuously to question the idea of sustainability that architects, the idea of health that architects are using, the idea of participatory process of planning that they are dealing with, the idea of efficiency on which most of the work of the architect is still based. All these kind of things. That is my objective. And it is inevitable that very often also our work and our critique is incorporated for the opposite purpose. Does not mean that we stop to try to do what we think that is right to do. And in this moment, that is what I think is right to do.
Thanks. I wonder what you think, or what's your hunch about the 3 assumptions or principles around which architects should be based on now in the future?
I have not yet arrived at this kind of a positive thinking, you know. Yeah, I hope that perhaps a new generation could do that. But clearly I think that it's very important to define the role and the figure of the architects in a totally different way. And the rejection of the last 20 years experience and role and architects and these kind of things is the most important starting point. Which will be the solution, I don't know. The second is to deal for sure with is a moment in which I feel architecture has to incorporate a lot of issues, discussion and problems coming from our society. So I'm very critical of a lot of some of the younger experimentation which are pushing for a return to a kind of autonomous idea of architecture. I feel that is a moment in which in a certain way architecture has to able to dissolve, to incorporate, to rethink, to establish a new ground on which to operate. And I think that this idea of an autonomous, return to an autonomous idea of architecture is for me very questionable in this moment. And apart from that, I have no other issue that I feel confident to raise. I think that for me is already enough.
I was just wondering if you could comment on the organization of some of these projects. So, for example, to make stickers or posters, you need funding. To make a green space in the middle of a street, you need maintenance of that space. So I was just curious about just the structure of these smaller organizations, how you get money for the project. So basically the smaller infrastructure that surrounds them.
Not all. The one that saw architects involved, some of them, they were supported by the limited fee of the architects, but most of them are based on volunteer activities and, how can I say, self-sustaining strategy. Very only in limited cases you have some grants or some institution which is indirectly supporting part of the work through research or activities. Generally is really based on volunteer work and the dedication not only of resources but especially of time, which is a very important resource, and knowledge, which is a very, very important resource. So most of these projects, they are not very, how can I say, they not implies a big economical background, but implies perhaps a lot of time and a lot of knowledge among different kind of people. And that I think is one of the most important resources.
Just because one of the reasons why I asked about funding was a lot of criticism towards Kickstarter urbanism. Or for example, if you do have projects that do get funded through grants, it takes a certain kind of knowledge, a certain kind of position to be able to just write them, know who to contact. I mean, it just, to volunteer, you have to have that.
I'll give you an example. For some of these people, not all, one case, we were interested not specifically in that project, but in another thing that the person was doing, and we give the person a small fee to do another kind of project. The person used this fee to develop a project like this one. So that is the kind of indirect support that they get, but to my knowledge, this fear that, especially in North America, there is a system of grant access sometimes, or some institution, that is, as soon as you get this support, does not imply any control. The problem is that very few institutions are able or willing to support certain kind of things like that without then questioning the political or social result of these kind of things, and without being afraid to recognize that their support is something that sometimes becomes illegal. So that is an institutional problem more than, so I see the problem more at the level of the institution than at the level of the actors of these kind of things. Clearly the North American and European context is very different in this respect, and the perception also is very, very different, this kind of situation.
Great. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up with that. Let's all thank Mirko for a wonderful conversation.
So, thank to you. Do everything, but not in my backyard.